Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Of course, lots of breaking news on Ukraine, on Russian oil ban, what that means for all of us, and how the Biden administration is handling that messaging-wise, how they're handling it practically, where they're going to try to fill the gap in terms of that loss of oil. The very latest on gas prices, the very latest on the economy, some troubling numbers about just how many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck now. Right. Those numbers are going up. On the other hand, we have some great news that 3 more Starbucks voted to unionize. So those union drives are now 6 for 7. There's about 120 more stores that have votes scheduled. It's unbelievable what's happening there. Some great media reaction on gas prices, some great undercover video of a New York Times reporter saying what he really thinks about January 6th.
This guy's a hero. We need to elevate him.
I feel like this dude might be watching Breaking Points.
I hope
if he's
so.
not, he should be.
Yeah, because Matt, if you're listening, you're welcome on the time.
We also have Anna from Red Scare Podcast is going to join us for a talk about some of the sort of like anti-Russian mania that is sweeping across the country. But Saagar, we wanted to start with the very latest from the ground in Ukraine.
That's right. You guys know we want to start first with the map. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. We rely on SimTac here, the same mapping service that we've continued to use, which is that Russian forces continue to gain some terrain in their advances towards Kiev. You can see that in the far left side of the map. They claim to have caused significant losses by Ukraine for the Russian offensive. We'll get to some of what those losses actually could look like. On the eastern side, Russian troops managed to seize the northern portion of a city of Izium, while a separate offensive in the same sector is aimed to circumvent Kharkiv, but was halted by the Ukrainian defenses. And then finally, additional Russian forces have been observed moving from Melitopol to support the active combat operations in the Donetsk region. So not a significant amount has changed on the ground in the last couple of days. Really what it is, the main top line story, is just how much the Russians have faced both a defensive and now we're going to have to move into the next phase of the campaign. So there's an estimation currently that they've now deployed 100% of the combat power that they have amassed on the Ukrainian border. Now, remember, not 100% of the combat power that they attain or that they have, 100% of the combat power that they had originally portioned to the operation. That does not mean that they don't have a ton more in reserves. They have a very large standing army. Just remember that in terms of what the future looks like. The most troubling one, and this is another thing that the Russians continue to do, let's put this up there on the screen. There was a major warning that the Russians were attacking or removing some critical infrastructure of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Now, what exactly happened here is very unclear. What they claimed is that the high voltage line was disconnected from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant due to damage caused by the occupiers. Now, keep in mind, this is all from the State Service of Special Communications of Ukraine. So they have an interest in promoting the most, dire situation. They said they could, have a partial meltdown as a result of this, that their fire extinguishing system was not working. Obviously, people were very concerned about that. However, and you were telling me, and I went ahead and found this, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association or agency, they said that they said, quote, they see no critical impact on safety. So this is the second now power plant that has come under attack by Russian forces. It's also unclear, Krystal, in the original report we had that they were attacking the nuclear power plant directly. It seems they were attacking the area around the power plant.
Right.
I'm just going to go ahead and say, don't attack nuclear power plants.
Bold stance you're taking there.
Yeah, bold stance. Really what it is, though, is it shows you the strategic power of nuclear, which is that Ukraine receives a significant amount of its power from these nuclear reactors. Hence, capture by Russian forces gives them the ability to deny energy to their populace, and also they can use it as a chit in future bargaining, and especially whenever you occupy the country, the use and the need to have power over the actual power plants themselves is going to be a significant thing that they have to make sure that they have control over to try and get the populace to bend to their will. So that's like the main thing.
Yeah, so the Ukrainians have an interest in sort of freaking everybody around the planet out about a potential nuclear meltdown. And so you saw, look, it's understandable when you have fighting going on close to Chernobyl, close to that other very large nuclear power plant that a significant proportion of the Ukrainian energy comes from. And we looked at the numbers. It's like a majority of Ukrainian energy actually comes from nuclear. So the Ukrainians want to sell this as like, this is a massive risk in terms of nuclear meltdown. What's probably really going on is what you said, which is that the Russians want to seize these critical points of infrastructure so that they have more control over what's going on for the population of Ukraine. With regards to Chernobyl, I did a little bit of digging on the specifics here. So what the Ukrainians were saying is you have these spent fuel rods that are in like a pond covered with water, and that water needs to be cooled in order to keep the rods cooled so you don't start another sort of nuclear chain reaction that results in the kind of meltdown that nobody wants and release of massive amounts of radiation. Their position was sort of like, we have to have that water cooled or else this is going to be a problem. What the IAEA said is, listen, these are spent fuel rods from like 20 years ago. So they've been cooling for a long time. As long as water is still covering them, in the short term, you're going to be fine. Now, is it a great situation to have Chernobyl with no electricity? Of course not. Because another issue is if something does go wrong, they have no ability to deal with it. They have no ability even to communicate to sort of sound the alarms and remedy whatever the issue is. So you have this bizarre situation right now, both at Chernobyl and also at that other large nuclear plant, the name of which I'm forgetting and is sort of complex and I couldn't really pronounce it anyway. Where the Russians have seized these areas and they are, you know, in control, but you still have the Ukrainians whose job it is to maintain this, who are actually doing the work to, you know, keep things safe. So this was obviously, anytime these nuclear power plants are in anywhere near the fighting, it's a very nerve-wracking situation. People are rightly very concerned. But at least according to the IAEA, there is no imminent danger from Chernobyl that we know of.
Right, and then actually just this morning, we have some bad news, but not unexpected, which is that the latest round of talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians appear to have broken down. They failed to make any progress towards ending the war. In terms of the actual demands, we brought you the last time that Dmitry Peskov had said that there were three separate, Dmitry Peskov is a Kremlin spokesperson, there were three separate demands of the Ukrainians. Number one, they have to recognize Crimea and the Eastern Separatist republics. Number two, they have to guarantee in their constitution that they will not join any bloc, aka the European Union and NATO. But three, and this is where things get murky, around quote unquote demilitarization, are they going to give up their arms? And also the political leadership of Ukraine itself. Would they settle for Zelensky remaining some sort of puppet prime minister and then, or president, and then they get to appoint a Russian prime minister? So obviously those last two things I noted are the total non-starter as to why I expect this to go into a hot and burning civil war for a very, very long period, or not a civil war, a war for a significant long period, including an insurgency. But let's get to this next one, and this requires a lot of parsing, and is actually very, very dangerous. So let's put this up there on the screen. Late last night, the press secretary issued this statement, quote, "We should all be on the lookout for Russia to possibly use chemical or biological weapons in Ukraine or to create a false flag operation using them." This is a significant statement because if you guys are not familiar, what happened over the last couple of days is that Victoria Nuland, who is a U.S. State Department official, was testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee and was asked by Senator Marco Rubio, well, you know, Russia and China have accused the United States of having these bioweapons facilities inside of Ukraine. And she said, and I think that this is important, that they were biological research facilities, and using the term research, not weapons, but that there was a concern that the Russians would take them over. Now, this has caused all sorts of consternation online. I think the takeaway on this is that it's a dangerous situation when both the Russians and the Chinese and now the West are accusing each other of deploying chemical or biological weapons in Ukraine. That could be the pretext and the justification on the Russian side, if they do so, as the West is claiming, in order to have a significant more military response, and vice versa, right? If there is a use of chemical or biological warfare by the Russians, then the West could then claim an escalation on their part, as we did obviously in the Assad regime. That's a violation of the Geneva Conventions, the Chemical Weapons Convention, and all of that. So we have to watch this very closely, Krystal.
Yeah.
There's a lot of propaganda going out there. What exactly the facts are, it is extraordinarily unclear as to whether these research facilities are even affiliated with the West. I mean, research does not necessarily mean bioweapons, but of course, given Wuhan and all of that, we have to be very wary of what happens within these. So I'm pretty concerned about this.
Yeah, this is one to just sort of put a pin in and keep an eye on, because it's very hard to sort of sort through the layers of propaganda and what's actually going on here. I mean, with that thing with Victoria Nuland, it seemed like Rubio was expecting her. Yeah. He was trying to swat away some of the Russian propaganda about WMDs and this sort of stuff.
That's right.
And so he was expecting this just blanket, like, no, of course not. And so when she gave a different answer and was like, well, and seemed sort of uncomfortable, this created a whole, fracas online. And then you have Jen Psaki coming out and basically saying, listen, of course we're in accordance with law and no, there's no, biological weapons. And on the other hand, we are worried that this propaganda is out there, that they may use it to create a false flag operation. Listen, on the higher level point about Russia sort of using this pretext of, WMDs and sort of throwing our Iraq language back at us in our face, just remember, if we were observing, the march up to the Iraq war and we saw these allegations of some, bio-research lab, like that still obviously wouldn't justify an invasion of Iraq.
Of course.
Nor even in the worst case, this would not justify an invasion of Ukraine. So this is one to be really careful with, to keep an eye on, because it is kind of a dangerous potential situation, especially as Russia, the war is in this really weird phase where Russia is not making a lot of gains. Meanwhile, civilians are really suffering in these cities, many of which have been cut off from any sort of heat, electricity, food. They're running out of medicine. They're having to hide in underground. It really is a terrible situation for the civilians. And every day that goes by, it becomes more difficult, more painful for the civilians on the ground. And yet Russia isn't really making that much progress. So you have this very sort of strange, grim dynamic right now that's playing out. And I guess what we're all waiting for is like, what's the next big shoe to drop? Mm-hmm. What shakes this out of its current more or less stasis? Yeah, let's give everybody an idea of the stasis. Put this up there on the screen. Also, keep in mind, this is coming from U.S. intelligence, so take that with what you will. That being said, on the Russia conflict, they've generally gotten it better than not. So here's what they say. U.S. estimates the Russian military assets lost in operable range as high as 8 to 10%, close to double the estimate last week as the U.S. has gathered more information. The U.S. estimates that the Ukrainian military has lost a similar percentage of its forces. 3 estimates mostly account for the losses of military equipment, aircraft, tanks, APCs, and trucks, since they're easier to verify. The U.S. estimates that Russia has lost somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 service members, though this assessment comes with low confidence. So once again, nobody knows how many people the Russians have lost, except the Russians. Here's what we know. At least 500 are dead. Those are the ones that they've admitted to. That's what they admitted.
It's probably on the higher end. 2,000 to 4,000 does seem very high. 4,000 something is about the entirety of U.S. losses in Iraq throughout the entire war. So to put that in perspective, even if it's not 2,000, that's a lot of people to die in 2 weeks on the Russian side. In terms of losses on the Ukrainian, they don't say. I would say it's probably 1-to-1. Maybe, could it possibly be even higher? Although the Ukrainians themselves, not like we can rely on their data. On the battlefield, here's what they say. Russian forces have advanced more quickly in the south, less so in the east and the north, though they continue to surround cities in the north and the east. The U.S. believes that Russian forces are still several days from being able to surround Kiev, and afterwards will face a protracted battle to control the city center. So that is the view from the Pentagon. You take it from what you will, but I do think it is somewhat useful information. Obviously, the Russians say that it's going swimmingly, that they're not particularly concerned about exactly what's happening whenever it comes to the ground. One update for everybody, which is actually a very good update, let's put this up there on the screen, which is that after this convoluted cockamamie scheme, which I will discuss more in my monologue, where the U.S. was trying to deliver fighter jets to the Ukrainians by basically strong-arming warning the Poles and the Romanians, saying, hey, you need to give them over. The Poles and the Romanians were like, no, we're not doing that. Then the Poles came up with a great idea. They were like, okay, we'll take the jets and we'll send them to you, to Ramstein Air Force Base. And then if you want, you can send them over to the Ukrainians. And the Pentagon was like, whoa, hey, hold on a second. They're like, we're not doing any of that. So as of right now, the fighter jet thing is not happening. I personally think that's a good thing.
Yes.
Anytime, NATO, as actually the Pentagon pointed out, they're like, it's just a bit too much to send a plane directly from a U.S. Air Force base in a NATO base into hot airspace delivered for the purposes of war.
Right.
I can't tell you why that's different than an anti-tank missile, but it just kind of is. And it's one of those things where the significance for escalation and more, especially if it would require a U.S. pilot to fly it over there, that's a whole other ballgame.
That's a key piece. Yeah. It's like, all right, they're in Germany. Who's gonna get them?
Right. If the Ukrainians want to come get it, that's different.
Right. And so I think that's where the Poles were like, we're not doing that. we're leave us out of this. And then when that hot potato got like sort of put in our corner, the Pentagon also was like, nah, this is not a good idea. So good.
Yeah.
That's
thank God.
Definitely
it was a stupid scheme from the start.
One decent decision. Is it totally off the table and they're going to give up on this?
Not,
no,
actually.
I don't think so. But yeah, I saw Tom Cotton tweeting like that this was a terrible decision. And of course, we should give them fighter jets. And how is this more escalatory than the anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles that we've already given? And it's like, well, somehow it is different. Number one, because you have to figure out what pilots are going to actually deliver these jets. And also, you raise a good point that maybe we have already escalated too much with the amount of weapons that we floated over a very short period of time, massively sort of indiscriminately arming the Ukrainians, given the way that has played out for us in past history.
That's right. And then finally on the diplomatic front, as we said, the talks have broken down, but there is an opening on the Ukrainian side. Let's put this up there, which is that President Zelensky has said he is, quote, open to compromise on the status of the 2 breakaway Russian territories. Furthermore, he said that Zelensky would no longer be pressing for NATO membership for Ukraine, basically being like, look, we know that they don't want us in there. So at least on 2 of these things, he hasn't said yet on Crimea. He said he's open to compromise whenever it comes to the Eastern republics. But I just think that the problem, Krystal, is even if you give up Crimea, the Eastern separatist republics, and NATO, if they still demand demilitarization and lack of sovereignty, how can you take that deal?
You can't.
Because they've already invaded your country.
Right.
It's like, this is why I just see both sides, the situation is totally untenable. And somebody has got to win. And I don't say that glibly, but winning means a tremendous loss of life. Like, we're really not prepared, I think, for what's coming. Given the state of the Russian advance, it's been 2 weeks, things are not going as planned. They need to ramp things up. Will they use a false flag attack or not? We'll see. Obviously there's a lot of information, but regardless, they need some justification to ramp up the use of force. And already we're seeing the terrible signs of this. It feels like Syria all over again. Everybody's seen the family, the photo of the family laying dead in the streets. The lady's a, chief accountant or whatever for some Silicon Valley firm. Her young daughter, 18-year-old son, dead, being attended to, literally just on the side of the road. And these are mom, kids. This is going to repeat itself over and over and over and over again until we can possibly find some solution to this conflict. So it's dark days ahead, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, today what it feels like we're heading for is years of long, intractable, grinding conflict.
I don't see another way.
And, Zelensky, I think all from before the invasion even started, was willing to offer real concessions, not paper concessions, like real actual concessions to try to respond to the Russian demands here. And, it would seem like saying, hey, we won't join a bloc, we won't join NATO, and we'll compromise on those 2 breakaway regions. We're willing to talk about it. That should, if you had anything approaching a good faith actor on the other side, open the door to real negotiations and a potential negotiated settlement, which is what we should all be cheering for here, because otherwise you are going to just have continued loss of life, long grinding, intractable conflict. But it doesn't seem like, even meeting those demands is close enough for what the Russians want here, what Putin specifically wants. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.